Alright, so I'm back on. Let me make sure that I have some volume. I went back and checked the video. I do see that there was volume in it. So, but it was acting up, so maybe we just needed to reboot or something. Let me know if you can hear me. Anybody that's on right now. If you can hear this volume coming through. Peace, King. So I'm on. I know you see me. Let me know if you can hear me, because I had some problems with the volume earlier. I was all in the thick of it. Okay, so you do hear me. Cool, cool. So I'm talking about this wisdom collections. I've already gone through the first chapter and just dealt with some of the things that we were bringing out in there. So I'm almost done with what I wanted to say, but I didn't want to leave it how I left it. So right here, I'm dealing with the root of disorder. In this book, Wisdom Collections, I'm covering a good amount of stuff. But one of the things that was highlighted was the root of disorder and how disorder can bring confusion to everything. Anything that could be going on, like something as simple as waking up late. Something as simple as just waking up not on time. If you look at that as an example, what happens? You have to rush to get to work. So that means you might end up speeding. You end up speeding means that you're putting other lives in jeopardy. You know what I'm saying? And then say you get a ticket. Now you're angry. Or, you get stopped. Now you're angry because you're getting pulled over. Right? So that's already throwing you off. Then you get to work, so you're late, so you're throwing off business. Right? So now your boss is upset because you're late. Now all of this stemmed from not being up on time. So all of it stemmed from disorder. So disorder brings confusion. Just an example of how one thing that could be off can lead to a chain of events that could be off. And a lot of times people don't go back to look and say, okay, this ended up bad, but where did it start? Where was the disorder in the first place? Well, wisdom, one of the benefits for walking in wisdom is that wisdom brings about safety. Wisdom brings about security. It's the spirit of counsel. It says, go this way, don't go that way, because if you go this way, it's safe. It'll be good for you. If you go that way, that's the way of hard knocks. That's the way of the fool. You're going to pay for that one. So wisdom looks out, but it only really is calling to the people that's seeking wisdom. Because the people who don't seek it, even when it's right in front of them, they still not going to see it. So where did it start? Wisdom brings safety and security. Where did it start? That's what we need to know, because once we know that, then we can look and see, well, maybe I need to plan. Wisdom tells us to plan and strategize. If I plan earlier, because if I notice a pattern that I'm always getting up late, I'm always rushing to work, I'm always speeding, I'm known, like there's some people, they're known for being late everywhere. Some people are known for being late everywhere, which means that it's not just about them being late. That speaks to a pattern of not prioritizing order. And see, there are certain tell signs of when someone's not walking in order, because their whole life begins to show. It just shows disorder in so many different places. But wisdom calls for us to get into alignment with order so that things would be made well for us. So one of the scriptures in Proverbs says wisdom has safety, security in one hand, and it has prosperity. And it's another thing in favor or something like that. I need to read it. It says basically she has these two things in her hand. And prosperity and honor. So honor and prosperity in one hand, safety in another hand. Those are the things we can expect from wisdom. You can expect that you would learn exponentially. You'll grow exponentially if you pursue wisdom. All right, you'll look better. The scripture says that there's beauty. There's beauty that's on those who walk in wisdom. But moving on, the other thing that I wanted to highlight, because as I was saying in the other teaching, is that the wisdom that I'm dealing with in this book is primarily dealing with spiritual wisdom, heavenly wisdom. I do deal with practical wisdom, wisdom that has to deal with your work ethic, doing business later on. But primarily my function, my metron, is dealing with being priests and kings and knowing how to operate in spiritual wisdom. So I build from that premise. But I do want to read from this passage because I'm in the apostolic wisdom and revelation section of the book. And it talks about apostleship is a warship. So I'm just going to read that for a minute. Apostleship is a warship, and it's a small one. So it says a warship is a traveling marine vessel belonging to the military of a sovereign state, bearing the external marks distinguishing such ships of its nationality under the command of an officer, duly commissioned by the government of that state, whose name appears in the appropriate service list, or its equivalent, and occupied by a crew which is under regular military disciplines. And now I'm going to go back to this because the language that I got was from adapting it from the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. Because when you study apostleship, then it's going to link you to understanding and studying navies and warships. The etymology of that goes back to that. But let's go back to, I'm going to read it again and insert where the apostle is. A warship is a traveling marine vessel. So that's dealing with the waters. You know, waters can represent represent the spirit, but also waters can represent people, many people. So a warship is a traveling marine vessel belonging to the military of a sovereign state. Somebody said kingdom, bearing the external marks distinguishing such ships of its nationality. We are a nation of kings and priests, under the command of an officer, apostle, duly commissioned by the government of that state, whose name appears in the appropriate service list, the Lamb's Book of Life, or its equivalent, and occupied by a crew which is under regular military disciplines. So understand this. So when you look at that, and this is another thing about wisdom, whenever you look at wisdom, it's almost like you're looking at two dimensions all the time at the same time. So when you're looking at wisdom, you could be looking at something spiritual, but extracting very practical principles from it. Or you could be looking at something natural and see all kind of spiritual applications to it. So it depends on what you need at the time. Both of them are present because wisdom is wisdom. The same wisdom that birthed apostles, prophets, and operated in miracles, signs, and wonders and deliverance, the same wisdom that created the flower, the tree, the sea, the mountains. It's all creativity. The manifestation of wisdom is in creativity. So that's one entry in there where I begin to start dealing more with the ministerial aspect of it. Now, that's not how the whole book flows, but these are sections. So I'm going to go back a little bit so I can just catch some people on some of the titles. So, and I said this book is on Amazon, so pick it up. Wisdom Collections. But the first section, I'm dealing with priestly knowledge. So that's when I'm dealing with the ministry of intercession and impartation and apostolic wisdom. And that's the section I'm talking about now. Some other discerning of spirits and pneumatics and deliverance and that kind of thing. The third section, I get into craftsmanship, productivity, innovation and creation, authenticity, so I start getting into some practical stuff there. In one section, I begin to start talking about the most controversial section, really, I believe is in chapter 4. So I know that part is going to, for the people who read it, that's going to spark up some questions. Some people might have some debates about it, but just I say search the scriptures. But I begin to deal with, are we Yah people or Jah people? I deal with the name Jehovah contrasted against Yahweh. What's the difference? The Caucasian Jesus. I talk about that. The nature of the Yah head, the physical body, that kind of stuff. So you got to get into that. You listen. It'll be good. It'll be good discussion if nothing else. And in chapter 7 or in section 4, I deal with the integration of man, wholeness. So I talked about earlier today sanctification and purity. And what's this whole idea about falling and getting back up and falling and getting back up and falling? Sometimes it's not that we ever fell. Sometimes we were never at a place of maturity in the first place, and we never grew. We grew in stature in terms of people seeing us, or we grew in popularity. We may have grown in those kind of ways. We may have even taken on other positions, but in some areas, it's not that we fell. It's that coming from the world, we never matured into areas. And so people calling it a fall when really it was a constant lifestyle that we never fully developed out of or matured out of. So I talk about that. The difference between judgment, or the connection between judgment, discernment, and restoration. When we need, many people, and it's stuff that's going on now with all these men getting caught up in this abuse, and a lot of it's valid. I'm just saying that by the Spirit, because the Lord told me that it is me who is pulling the covers back on this sin and on a lot of this perversion that's going on. So I'm doing it. But we also know that anytime that there's a wave, there's also debris. And so that means anytime that there is a true reckoning, God's doing something and he's revealing something and he's prompting people who are victims of oppression to come out and speak, it's going to be people that's trying to hustle the system too. I mean, just come on. People trying to get paid off that too. But this is one of the things that he said. And he pointed me to Proverbs chapter 1. He said this is a part of wisdom that people don't know. And that wisdom is not always quiet and silent and in the corner. When it comes to justice, wisdom cries loud in the streets. So in Proverbs 1:20 says, wisdom calls aloud outside. She raises her voice in the open squares. She cries out in the chief concourses, at the openings of the gates in the city. She speaks her words. How long, you simple ones, will you love simplicity? For scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. Now, this is wisdom speaking. Turn at my rebuke. Surely I will pour out my spirit on you. I will make my words known to you, because I have called and you refused. I have stretched out my hand and no one regarded. Because you disdained all my counsel and would have none of my rebuke, I also will laugh at your calamity. So this is one of the things that people don't know about wisdom, the characteristic of wisdom, Sophia. Wisdom will also laugh at you and mock you because you rejected her. She will mock you because you refused her. So a lot of times we don't have that imagery when we think about wisdom. We think about piety and, maybe a gray beard guy looking just real calm and cool, or maybe a monk presentation you might think about with wisdom. But wisdom will cry out loud in the streets for justice. Wisdom will cry out loud and call for the fool to be exposed and call for the righteous to stand. The scripture says, when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. So wisdom is not always quiet and in the corner. Wisdom can be very loud. Wisdom can protest in the streets. Wisdom can, when it's time for reckoning, because see, wisdom calls for a whole lot of examples and warnings. Don't do this. Don't go that way. Go this way. But after all of her attempts of convincing you that the way of Yah was right. And if we still choose to go wrong, wisdom will laugh and mock us in our foolishness. We don't want that. We don't want to see that side of wisdom, because it's equity, it's justice. So these are just some things that you're going to find out as you begin to dig in this topic of wisdom. Another thing I wanted to bring out, same in 22, wanted to bring out a section that deals with authorizing and credentialing. I think that's important, because you have any and everybody saying they're called to be this, called to be that. You even hear my name as Apostle T. Well, who told you you were an apostle? Did you see the Lord? Have you raised up the dead? What legitimate miracles have you seen and walked in? What kind of revelation that you have that's different from the pastor down the street? What makes you this? What's up with all these titles? These are all legitimate questions, by the way. They're all legitimate questions. But the thing that I have to say about authorizing and credentialing is that I say here, your certification only goes as far as the reputation of your commissioner. This is a wisdom statement. Your certification only goes as far as the reputation of your commissioner. If your authorizer is not known or fades into obscurity, then your papers are worth little in the eyes of the people who look for papers. See, some people pride themselves in the fact that they got somebody's papers, but their papers are only as legitimate as the institution that produced them. So if the institution, organization, administration that produced them fades into obscurity, then their papers mean nothing. And then I give an example that this is why graduates give constant support to their learning institutions long after graduation. I want you to catch this, though. I want you to catch this connection. This is why the alumni still pour into and sow into the institutions after they've received papers. Why? Because they still need to be relevant. They need their institution to remain viable, because that justifies what they were giving. If your institution fades away and corrupts, then now I'm linking more than one concept. I'm not just dealing with spiritual matters now. I'm dealing with social matters. I'm dealing with natural things as well. If the school comes to nothing, then so is the value of its authorization. So then my question after all that is, so who has commissioned you? Authorization, credentialing, who has commissioned you? Because if I've been commissioned from the Lord and not by man, then the Lord, his reputation is intact. He will never fade into obscurity. He will never die. He will never be unseated. He will never be dethroned. So therefore, my commissioning is sure, because my commissioning doesn't come from man. Though man may have affirmed, and I'm using me as an example, but I'm talking about you and your work as well. Though man may have recognized and affirmed, that's like John the Baptist did not give Christ the Spirit as the Spirit descended upon him as a dove. John the Baptist did not give Christ anything, but he openly affirmed and openly spoke out and declared in the midst of the people that which already resided in the heart of the Father, that this is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. So he openly does this, and he didn't even want to do that. He didn't even want to do that. He had to be convinced to do that. And so if man commissions me, then when man fades into obscurity, when man's name and reputation goes away, then I have nothing to legitimize my authority in the Spirit. So many people are touting the fact that they went here, they did this, they did that, and these are the things that are supposed to impress you, but they only impress people who seek those things for validation. Now, I'm not knocking education, nor am I knocking authorization and credentialing, because I believe that the same way we have the living word, but we have a physical document of the Logos. In the same way we are spiritual beings and we have physical bodies to legitimize us in the earth. In the same way, though the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, he has a visible church to move through and walk through, a legitimate body of people. Then the same way, though I've been commissioned in the spirit, it is proper for there to be some kind of natural recognition of that commissioning. When David was commissioned, when hands were laid on David and he was anointed, that was one thing, but he did not start just walking in his kingship just because of the anointing that was upon him when Samuel laid hands on him. There had to be some mighty men, some men who would recognize his kingship. So it makes sense to have some level of doing that, but we need to make sure that if everything is relying upon an institution, you better make sure that institution lasts. Not only does this wisdom speak to licensing and preaching, but it also speaks to the ancient cosmology and the ancient mindset about the priests and even heathen priests prior to Levitical priests. The priests of the Egyptian priests and priests of Midian and priests of different countries and different nations, different deities. This was the mindset of the priesthood in the temples, that if our gods fade into mythology, if they fade into obscurity, then our priests will no longer have work. They will no longer have an occupation. If our deity is not known by the next generation, then we will no longer have an outfit or an office to work out of. Our temples will close down. The offerings will stop coming into our temples because no one remembers the name of our God. So what they would begin to do is they would begin to merge gods together. So if one god faded into obscurity, in order to bring that god back, which is in the interest of the priests of that god, because that's their livelihood, in order to bring that god back, then they merge features and attributes of other gods and say that they were both the same god. So then that's why you could see how you have different names, different gods, but they basically are the same thing, because they begin to start trading features, trading attributes. The sky god, connected to the heavens, or the gods of the sea connected to other gods of the sea from other nations. Let us go ahead and merge these functions and roles in order to keep our institutions alive. This is why when Yahweh said, I'm going to bless my people even though they're acting crazy, and even though they're threatening the reputation of my name, I'm going to rescue them for my name's sake. Because if anyone wants to know what the work of the Father is, what the work of the Lord is in eternity, what's he doing? Just sitting there collecting prayers, answering them? No, he's preserving his name throughout the generations. When he converts us into a name. Be baptized into a name. When he calls us by name into a name. He gives us his name. If my people who are called by my name. So our priesthood is really a priesthood that serves to make his glory, his name, remembered throughout the generations in every age, that his name will not be forgotten, which is why it's important to know his name. All right. So anyway, that's all of that's dealing with wisdom. Revelation is dealing with the kind of stuff I'm talking about in this book. I'm going to pause on this for right now. And hopefully you'll get it. Wisdom Collections. Wisdom Collections. It is the second in the Sage Chronicles. The first one was Watching from My Post. Was a collection of wisdom. It's the second one. And just want to let you know I have some other things going on after this. I'm going to hit you up in just a sec. I have some other things after this that's coming out. I got an adult coloring book coming out next year. Some other good stuff. And, keep following, keep supporting. I believe that next year will be a mighty year. And so I'm already in next year because we're on the Hebrew calendar. So I'm already in that year now. So we already rolling in it. Producing, manufacturing kingdom works. But I want to encourage you too that if there are some things that you want to put out, some words you want to say, and you say, well, maybe I can write a book. Don't think that that's far from you. It's nothing to write a book these days. Just make sure that you have something that you live out, that you understand, and that you don't mind speaking about. Because what's the point of writing a book and you're not going to talk about it after you wrote it? So I'll help you with it. If you have a story, if you have something you want to get out, I want to help you with it. But support this right here, because the Lord is raising up new voices to speak. And it's going to be different than what you saw before. It's not going to be a whole lot of just hooping and hollering. We're breaking down, the ethereal sciences, royal priesthood education. All right, grace and peace, good people. I'll talk to you. Shalom.